The vessel of the Signian consensus hung in the dark like a sliver of polished bone. Within its silent, organically curved corridors, the Gestalt consciousness of 1,000 minds debated with the speed of light. They called themselves the consensus, for no single being held authority. Their existence was a harmonious sea of thought, and for the first time in their long history, that sea was about to touch another shore. Xylo, the primary emissary, stood as the focal point for the decision. Its physical form, a tall, willowy column of shifting pearlescent light and matter, undulated gently in the low gravity of the communion chamber. Its body was a canvas for its thoughts. Right now, the patterns were calm, a slow spiral of cerulean and gold, indicating serene anticipation. "The preparations are complete," resonated the thought of Kalen, the designated weaver for this contact. Kalen's form was smaller, its light patterns quicker, more excitable, a flurry of silver and white. The human subjects are receptive. Their minds are loud, chaotic, but not malicious. They sing with individual anxieties, hopes, and a startling capacity for compartmentalization. It is like a world of 1 billion separate islands, each with its own frantic weather system. Xylo's pattern deepened to a thoughtful violet, and you perceive no inherent danger in the initial resonance. Their technological records are filled with conflict, a history of turning tools into weapons. No more than any young species, Kalen projected. Their aggression is a surface storm. Beneath it, there is a deep foundational desire for connection. They are lonely, Xylo, terribly lonely. They shout into the cosmos with radio waves, hoping someone will answer. To deny them the true language of the mind would be a cruelty. The consensus murmured its agreement, a subtle shift in the ambient psychic pressure of the chamber. They had observed humanity for 20 of its frantic years, listening to the cacophony of their broadcasts, analyzing their art, their wars, their desperate acts of love and sacrifice. They were a species of beautiful, terrifying contradictions. But the consensus had a core tenet: all sentient life deserved the chance to join the great conversation. To be isolated was to be unfulfilled. "The chosen three are diplomats and scientists," Kalen continued, its light patterns sharpening with focus. "Their minds are trained, disciplined. They have been briefed on our nature. They are prepared to feel the touch of another consciousness. We will begin with a simple greeting, an emotional resonance of peace, a conceptual offering of shared knowledge. The risk is not from them, but from the gestalt of their species." A dissident thought rippled through the chamber, a flicker of discordant crimson from an elder mind. 1 billion disconnected, chaotic minds. What happens when our touch echoes through their collective unconscious? You are proposing to strike a bell that has never been struck. We do not know the sound it will make. "Caution is the anchor of wisdom," Xylo projected, its light softening to acknowledge the concern. "But an anchor that is never raised keeps the ship from its destination. We will be gentle. Kalen is our most delicate weaver. The link will be no more than a whisper, a tendril of shared feeling. We will introduce ourselves, and then we will withdraw, allowing them time to process the experience." The crimson flicker subsided, absorbed back into the placid blue of agreement. The decision was made. For the first time, the silent, invisible web of telepathic connection that bound the stars would be extended to the loud, lonely inhabitants of the third planet. Kalen moved to the center of the chamber, its form becoming a brilliant point of white light. It extended its consciousness, stretching it across the 200,000 kilometers of space separating their ship from the locus, the orbital station where humanity had sent its finest to meet them. Kalen found the three minds, waiting like candles in a dark room. It perceived their nervous energy, their biochemical spikes of adrenaline and cortisol, but also a profound, underlying curiosity. "I am ready," Kalen sent to the consensus. "I am opening the channel." Xylo watched, its own mind linked to Kalen's, a silent observer. It felt Kalen gently brush against the mental shields of the first human, a woman named Eris Thorn. The human's mind recoiled for a microsecond, a flash of instinctual fear, before her training took over and she opened herself to the contact. The feeling that flowed back was astonishing. It was a torrent of sensory data, of half-formed thoughts, of memories rendered in vibrant, emotional color. It was music and mathematics, the memory of a child's laughter and the abstract dread of mortality, all swirling together. It was messy, glorious, and utterly unique. Xylo felt a wave of paternal affection for this vibrant, chaotic species. Kalen wove the gentle greeting, a chord of pure, unfiltered peace. It was a feeling of homecoming, of finding a long-lost friend. Xylo felt the human minds respond, their initial fear melting into awe and a profound sense of relief. The connection was a success. Then Kalen went deeper, not into the individual minds, but into the space between them. As instructed, it sought the substrate of their shared consciousness, the common soil from which their individual islands rose. It was a search for the human equivalent of the consensus, the deep-down, foundational mind of the species. It found something. It was not a consciousness, it was an absence, a void, a place where thought went to die, but the void had structure. It had edges. It felt ancient, cold, and impossibly vast. Kalen, driven by the instinct of a weaver to understand the shape of all minds, touched the edge of that void with the barest whisper of a probe. The reaction was not hostile. It was not angry. It was absolute. It was the psychic equivalent of a tectonic plate shifting. A pressure that was not a pressure, a force that had no energy yet possessed infinite inertia. It did not speak in words, but in pure, undeniable reality. A concept was slammed into Kalen's mind, and through it, into the entire consensus. This domain is guarded. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact, as immutable as gravity. The thought was ancient beyond comprehension, so old it felt like a structural component of reality itself. And behind the thought, layered in the very fabric of its meaning, was a chilling, implicit corollary. Trespassers will be unmade. The consensus screamed. It was a silent mental cataclysm. 1,000 minds, linked as one, experienced the sheer, soul-crushing terror of Kalen's discovery. The harmonious sea of thought became a tsunami of pure panic. On the communion chamber floor, Kalen's physical form convulsed violently, the brilliant white light of its being fractured, sputtering into a chaotic static of terrified crimson and stark black. A wave of psychic agony washed over the ship, so potent that the vessel's organic systems flickered, the lights dimming as if in sympathy. Xylo was thrown back, its own mind reeling. The serene patterns on its form exploded into a shrieking, jagged mess of panicked colors. It had felt the presence for only a nanosecond, a reflected echo from Kalen's mind, but it was enough. It was the feeling of a bacterium realizing it lived on the skin of a thinking god that had just noticed an itch. It was the horror of discovering that the basement of the house you lived in was not empty, but was, in fact, the sealed tomb of something that should never, ever be awakened. "Sever the link," Xylo shrieked, the thought tearing through the panicked consensus. "Sever it now." The connection was not so much cut as it was cauterized. The psychic backlash was immense. Kalen's form collapsed, its light extinguishing into a dull, wounded gray, its mind shattered into a million screaming fragments. The consensus recoiled from the human mindscape, as if from a white-hot flame, the collective terror leaving a permanent scar on their shared consciousness. In the sudden ringing silence of the chamber, now filled only with the echoes of their own fear, Xylo's form slowly, tremulously, reformed. The beautiful, shifting colors were gone, replaced by a rigid, defensive pattern of black and gray, like burnt-out circuitry. A new thought, cold and brittle with fear, began to form in Xylo's mind, and it spread through the shattered remnants of the consensus with the speed of a freezing crystal. It was no longer a debate. It was a survival imperative. "Quarantine," Xylo projected, the thought stripped of all warmth, all curiosity, all hope. Effective immediately, total mental and psychic isolation. The species designated human is not to be touched. Their minds are a forbidden territory. Their entire world, their entire consciousness is a cage, and we do not know what they are keeping locked inside. Elias Vance prided himself on his patience. It was the cornerstone of a 30-year diplomatic career that had taken him from tense ceasefire negotiations in the fractured states of Africa to the delicate trade bartering with the first Martian colonies. Patience, he always said, was not about waiting. It was about maintaining your composure while everything and everyone around you was losing theirs. His patience was currently being tested to its absolute limit. He sat at a sterile white table in the human diplomatic suite of the Locus, a marvel of engineering and optimism that orbited the moon, a neutral ground for this historic meeting. Across from him, Dr. Eris Thorne stared blankly at the wall, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. The other volunteer, linguist Ben Carter, was pacing relentlessly behind her. "It was beautiful," Eris whispered, for the 10th time in the last hour. "I felt everything, like I was part of a song. There was no fear, just welcome." "And then it was gone," Ben snapped, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Like a door slamming shut, not just shut, locked and barred. I felt a shockwave, not from them, from somewhere else." Elias steepled his fingers, his face a mask of calm neutrality that he absolutely did not feel. "Describe the shockwave." "It wasn't a sound," Eris said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were wide, confused. "It was a feeling of absolute finality, like the end of an argument you didn't even know was happening." "It felt like terror," Ben countered, stopping his pacing. "But it wasn't our terror. It was theirs, it poured off them, Elias. One second we were connecting, and the next it was like they'd seen a ghost. No, not a ghost, something infinitely worse." Elias nodded slowly, cataloging the information. He had seen it too, from the observation chamber. One moment, the three Cygnian emissaries, their forms shimmering with what he'd come to recognize as serene concentration, had been perfectly still. The next, the central one, Kalen, had collapsed. The lead emissary, Xylo, had recoiled as if struck by lightning, its elegant form flickering violently. The third had simply vanished, its light winking out. In the hour since, there had been nothing but silence. The glyphs had retreated to their section of the station, a single terse message sent via text comm. "We require time to process the interaction." "Process what?" Ben demanded, his voice rising. "We did everything they asked. We opened our minds, we followed the protocols. What in God's name did they find in there that made them react like that?" That was the question, wasn't it? Elias stood and walked to the viewport. The blue and white marble of Earth hung in the blackness, a silent, beautiful mystery. For the first time, he felt a sliver of unease, a prickle of fear that had nothing to do with diplomatic fallout. The glyphs were an ancient, spacefaring race with a collective, telepathic consciousness. What could a species like that possibly be afraid of? And what, in the name of all that was holy, did it have to do with them? His comlink chimed, a soft, respectful tone. It was the glyphs. Finally. "Vance here," he said, his voice betraying none of his inner turmoil. "Ambassador Vance," came the synthesized voice, the one the glyphs used for formal communication. It was always devoid of emotion, but now it sounded different, brittle, cold. "Emissary Xylo will meet with you in the central chamber in 15 minutes, alone." "I'll be there," Elias replied, and the link went dead. "Alone?" Eris asked, her voice trembling. Elias turned from the window, his diplomatic mask firmly back in place. "It seems our counterparts have finished processing." He straightened his jacket. "Let's hope they're willing to share their conclusions." He walked toward the door, his long-practiced composure a thin shield against the growing dread in his gut. This was no longer a first contact scenario. It felt like he was walking into a sentencing. The central chamber was designed to be a symbol of unity. The air composition, gravity, and light levels were a precise compromise between human and Cygnian needs. In the middle of the room, a sapling from Earth grew in a containment field, opposite a crystalline structure that hummed with a low, alien energy. It was meant to feel like a bridge between worlds. Today, it felt like a chasm. Xylo was waiting for him. The change in the emissary was shocking. The graceful, flowing patterns of light and color were gone. Its form was now a rigid, unmoving column of muted gray, like a statue carved from granite. The only light it emitted was a faint, sickly violet that seemed to be absorbed by the air around it. The being that had radiated a sense of ancient calm now radiated pure, unadulterated dread. "Emissary Xylo," Elias began, his voice calm and even. "I trust your colleague Kalen is recovering." The gray form didn't so much as ripple. The synthesized voice emerged, flat and cold. "The Weaver is stabilized. Its consciousness has been catastrophically damaged." "I am truly sorry to hear that," Elias said, and he meant it. "What happened? Was there some unforeseen biological incompatibility? Some feedback loop we couldn't have predicted?" He was offering them an out, a simple scientific explanation that could smooth things over. Xylo did not take it. The failure was not biological. It was conceptual. Conceptual, Elias repeated, frowning. I don't understand. You are incapable of understanding. It is the nature of your condition. A cold knot formed in Elias' stomach. My condition. You're speaking of the human condition. We are, the voice stated. We have spent the last standard hour in full consensus. Every mind in our civilization has reviewed the data from the contact. The conclusion is unanimous and absolute. Xylo's static form seemed to darken, the violet light dimming further. As of this moment, the Cygnian consensus declares a full and binding quarantine on the species designated human and the star system it occupies. Elias stared, speechless. Quarantine, the word was a punch to the gut. It was a term for disease, for contamination. On what grounds? He finally managed, his voice tight. On the grounds of existential threat, Xylo stated, not of a physical nature. We have no fear of your technology or your aggression. We fear what you are host to. Host to? We are not host to anything. You are, Xylo insisted, and for the first time, a flicker of something that looked like raw terror rippled across its gray surface. Your consciousness, your collective mind, it is not empty, it is not free territory. Elias felt a surge of frustration. What are you talking about? What did Kalen see? It did not see anything. It touched a boundary, Xylo said. A barrier in the foundational layer of your species' psyche. We thought it was a void, a primitive, unformed collective. We were wrong. It is a seal, a lock on a door, and something is sealed inside. The air in the room felt suddenly very cold. Elias' mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A species-wide psychological delusion, a shared myth. Our history is full of such things. This was not a myth. The synthesized voice was sharp, cutting. Myths are stories. This was a presence. It was not alive as you or I understand it, but it was aware. It was not malevolent, but it was absolute. It was a warden standing guard over a prison, and the prison is the mind of every human who has ever lived. Elias could only stare. This was beyond any diplomatic scenario he had ever trained for. This was the language of madness. A warden, a prison, Xylo, this makes no sense. We are a free species. No, Xylo stated, the word echoing with the chilling certainty of 1,000 minds. You are not. You are a protected species, or a quarantined one. The distinction is academic. Something of immense antiquity and power has laid claim to the very foundation of your consciousness. It permits you to live your individual lives, to think your individual thoughts, but it does not permit anyone else to enter. When our weaver touched that boundary, it responded. It declared your minds a domain under its protection, or its ownership. The implications of what Xylo was saying were staggering, terrifying. And you are breaking off all contact because of this, Warden. We are not breaking off contact. We are erecting a wall, Xylo corrected. All Cygnian telepaths are now forbidden, under penalty of psychic dissolution, from making any attempt to read or contact a human mind. Our ships will maintain a perimeter around your system. We will share technology. We will trade information via conventional means. But the true language of the mind is now forbidden between our species. Your minds are off-limits, conceptually hazardous. Elias felt his carefully constructed composure begin to crack. The hope of a generation, the dream of true union with another intelligent species, was being shattered by what sounded like a ghost story. You are condemning our entire species based on a feeling, a single, terrifying moment you cannot even properly describe. We can describe it perfectly, Xylo retorted, and a violent shudder ran through its form. It was the feeling of a child's hand reaching into a dark hole and touching the skin of something impossibly large and cold that has been sleeping for eons. And the sleeper stirred. The emissary's form began to recede, its light fading. The quarantine is not a punishment, Ambassador. It is a shield for us. We do not know what you are, humanity. We do not know what sleeps in your shared soul, and we are now far, far too afraid to find out. The conversation is over. Xylo's form dissolved completely, leaving Elias Vance standing alone in the center of the chamber. The sapling from Earth seemed to mock him with its simple, living innocence. He looked at it, then instinctively raised a hand to his own temple. For the first time in his life, he felt a profound and unsettling sense of being owned. He was standing inside a house he had always thought was his, only to be told by a terrified visitor that there was a dragon sleeping in the cellar. And he had never even known there was a cellar. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in bureaucratic absurdity and escalating tension. Elias felt less like a diplomat and more like the world's most frustrated zookeeper, trying to explain to one animal why the other had suddenly refused to play. Earth Command was apoplectic. The initial reports were met with disbelief, then suspicion, then outright hostility. Generals saw a Signian deception, a prelude to an attack. Politicians saw a calculated insult, a way to declare humanity inferior without firing a shot. Scientists clamored for data, for sensor readings, for any scrap of quantifiable evidence, but there was none. The event had been purely psychic, a ghost in the machine of the mind. Elias found himself in an endless loop of video conferences, his face projected onto massive screens in secure bunkers on Earth. He repeated Xylo's words over and over, his own voice sounding more hollow and insane with each repetition. "They claim to have encountered a presence," he would say, trying to keep his tone clinical. "An ancient intelligence that acts as a guard or a warden over our collective consciousness." "A warden," General Madsen would scoff, his bulldog face a mask of contempt. "So we're prisoners in our own heads and we never even knew it. Vance, do you hear yourself? This is a tactic. They're trying to destabilize us psychologically." "With all due respect, General," Elias would counter, his patience worn thin as paper, "I was there. I saw them. This wasn't a tactic. This was sheer, unadulterated terror. Their most skilled telepath, Kalen, is effectively brain-dead. Their entire species has recoiled from us as if we are radioactive. Fear like that cannot be faked on a civilization-wide scale." But he had no proof beyond his own observations and the frantic, confused testimony of Aris Thorne and Ben Carter. The glyphs, for their part, were maddeningly consistent. They maintained diplomatic relations, but at an extreme distance. Trade goods were exchanged via automated drones. Scientific data was transmitted in encrypted packets. All communication was handled through their cold, synthesized voice program. They had built a wall of silence, and from behind it, they treated humanity with the detached, cautious protocol one might use for handling a bomb of unknown yield. The locus became a ghost station. The human and Signian crews occupied their respective sectors, passing each other in the corridors with averted eyes and a palpable sense of tension. The dream of cooperation had died, replaced by a cold, nervous coexistence. Elias spent his days poring over the recordings of the first contact. He watched the moment of the event 1,000 times, the subtle shift in the room's ambient energy, the way Kalen's form had flared and then collapsed, the violent, full-body flinch from Xylo. He zoomed in on Xylo's patterns in the milliseconds before they devolved into chaos. There was a shape there, a brief, jagged symbol that flashed across its surface. He sent the image to Ben Carter, the linguist. "It's not part of their normal symbolic language," Ben reported back 2 days later, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "It's archaic, almost like a warning glyph. The closest translation I can get is a composite concept. It means something like property of, do not disturb, and great danger all at once." "Property of whom?" Elias asked. Ben just shook his head. "It doesn't say. It's like a sign on a fence post in the middle of nowhere. It just says, 'Keep out.' It assumes you know who owns the land." Frustrated, Elias decided on a new approach. If he couldn't get answers about what they saw, perhaps he could learn more about the ones who had seen it. He requested access to the Signian medical bay to inquire about Kalen's condition, framing it as a humanitarian gesture. To his surprise, they agreed. He was met not by a medical officer, but by Xylo itself. The emissary's form was still the muted, anxious gray, but it seemed less rigid today, as if worn down by grief. "Your concern is, noted ambassador," the synthesized voice said. They led him into a circular, softly glowing chamber. In the center, Kalen's form floated. The vibrant light was gone, replaced by a dim, flickering silver. It was small, shrunken, like a dying ember. Its consciousness, Xylo explained, had been shattered. The consensus was constantly trying to piece it back together, feeding it shared memories of peace and harmony, but the fragments would not hold. And then Elias saw it. Kalen's physical form was making a small, repetitive gesture. A shimmering tendril of light would extend from its main body and trace a complex shape in the air before retracting, only to repeat the motion seconds later. It was the same jagged, archaic symbol from the recording of Xylo's skin. It does that constantly. Xylo's voice was almost soft, a low hum beneath the synthesis. It is the last coherent thought it was able to form, the echo of the boundary. It is all that is left of it. Elias watched the pathetic, repetitive motion, the endless tracing of a warning sign. He felt a profound sense of pity, not just for Kalen, but for the entire Cygnian race. They had reached out in friendship and had been horribly burned by a fire they didn't know existed. "Tell me what you felt, Xylo," Elias said quietly, abandoning the official pretense. "Not the diplomatic statement. You. What did you feel?" Xylo's gray form shimmered. For a long moment there was no sound. Then the synthesized voice returned, but it was different, slower, more thoughtful. The hum beneath it was tinged with something that sounded like sorrow. "Imagine, Ambassador, that you are a cartographer. You have spent your life mapping the world, and you believe you understand the fundamental laws of geography. Then one day, you find a new continent. You step ashore, and as your foot touches the sand, you realize that the entire landmass is not made of rock and soil. It is the back of a single, sleeping creature, and you have just woken it up." Elias felt a chill trace its way down his spine. "That is the closest I can come to an analogy," Xylo continued. "We reached into what we thought was the empty space of your collective mind, the psychic ocean from which you all evolved, and we found it wasn't an ocean. It was a membrane, a thin layer of reality stretched over something else, something that was there long before your species learned to think. The warden, as we call it, is not a separate entity living inside you. It is you. It is the foundation on which your consciousness is built. It is the silent, sleeping bedrock of your souls." "And it warned you away," Elias said, the pieces clicking into place with a dreadful finality. "It did not warn," Xylo corrected softly. "A star does not warn a moth not to fly into it. It simply is. Its nature is its own warning. The presence simply made its nature known to us. It defined its territory, and that territory is the human mind. We do not know its purpose. Is it a guardian protecting you from cosmic threats you cannot perceive? Or is it a farmer protecting its livestock? We do not know. We only know that we are not welcome in its field." Elias looked from the broken form of Kalen to the grieving form of Xylo. The hostility he had felt from Earth, the suspicion and anger, all of it seemed so petty now, so profoundly ignorant. The glyphs weren't their enemies. They were just the first to see the bars of the cage. "What do we do now?" Elias asked, the question directed as much to himself as to the alien. "We respect the boundary," Xylo said. "We trade. We talk. We learn from each other from a safe distance. We treat your species as one might treat a holy site, a place of great power and great mystery that must not be trespassed upon. Perhaps one day your own species will develop the ability to speak to your foundation, to ask it the questions we dare not ask. Until then, we will watch, and we will wait, and we will keep our distance." Elias left the medical bay with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The problem was not the glyphs. The problem was humanity itself. The mystery was not in the stars, but behind their own eyes. He returned to his quarters and opened a secure channel to a friend at the Historical Archives Division. "Maria," he began, "I have a strange research request. I want everything you can find on a recurring concept in human history. Mythology, fringe science, religion, psychology. Anything about a guardian, a silent watcher, a species-wide psychic field, a collective unconscious that is more than just a theory. Anything that suggests we are not entirely alone in our own heads." He didn't know what he was looking for. A myth, a forgotten god, a Jungian archetype run amok. But for the first time, he felt he was finally asking the right questions. The quarantine wasn't an end to diplomacy. It was the beginning of a completely new kind of exploration, the exploration of the inner space of humanity itself. And he, Elias Vance, a patient man in an impossible situation, would be its first ambassador. The locus settled into a new, strange normality. The corridor chatter died down, replaced by a formal, professional silence. Humans and glyphs maintained their schedules, their research. their carefully managed exchanges of data and materials. It was the coldest peace Elias had ever witnessed. It was the polite, quiet tension of two people sharing a house, both acutely aware of a monster locked in the attic, but neither willing to speak its name. Elias dedicated himself to his new research. He devoured the files Maria sent him, a deluge of humanity's deepest and most esoteric thoughts. He read about the Akashic records, the noosphere, the Gnostic concept of the demiurge, a lesser, ignorant god who had fashioned the material world as a prison for the sparks of a higher divinity. He waded through ancient myths of sleeping titans who would one day awaken and remake the world, of guardian spirits bound to bloodlines or holy places. He saw a pattern emerge. It was faint, a thread woven through thousands of years of human belief. It was the persistent, recurring idea that humanity was not the master of its own house. That consciousness was a gift or a curse from something older, that there were doors in the mind that were meant to remain closed. These ideas were always on the fringes, dismissed as mysticism or madness, but they were always there. He started a new dialogue with Xylo, not in the formal chambers but through text-based comms late in the station's designated night cycle. He didn't push for answers about the contact. Instead, he shared his own findings. "Vance, I've been reading our own philosophies. The concept of a collective unconscious was proposed by a psychologist named Jung. He believed it was the reservoir of all our shared ancestral experiences. Xylo, we have reviewed his work. His theory is incomplete. He saw the cellar door, but he believed the cellar was empty. Vance, and you believe it is not. Xylo, we do not believe, we know, we have rattled the lock." Their conversations became a strange, remote kind of partnership. Elias, the archaeologist of the human soul, digging up forgotten clues. Xylo, the terrified eyewitness, providing chilling context. One day, Elias tried a new line of questioning. "Vance, you said the Weaver, Kalen, was catastrophically damaged, but your species is a gestalt, a collective. Can you not simply reintegrate its consciousness, heal it with your own?" There was a long pause before Xylo's reply came. "Xylo, the damage is not like a wound. It is like a resonant frequency. A poison note that once heard can never be unheard. Kalen's mind is now tuned to the frequency of the Warden. It is a continuous echo of that absolute, terrifying declaration of ownership. To fully reintegrate Kalen would be to introduce that poison into the core of the consensus. It would be like inviting the Warden's echo to live inside us all. We cannot. We can only soothe the fragments, keep them from shattering completely." The message chilled Elias to the bone. The contact hadn't just scarred Kalen. It had turned its very mind into a carrier for the psychic toxin of the Warden's presence. A single touch had created a permanent contamination. The political situation with Earth was deteriorating. General Madsen and his faction were gaining influence. They saw the Cygnian quarantine as an act of weakness, a sign that the aliens were cowards. The rhetoric was escalating, moving from suspicion to aggression. They were proposing a probe, a military vessel to push past the Cygnian perimeter and call their bluff. Elias knew he had to do something. He had to make them understand. A simple report wouldn't be enough. He needed something more. He needed a witness. He requested another meeting with Xylo, this time in person. He found the emissary in an observation dome overlooking the swirling clouds of Jupiter. "They're going to push," Elias said, without preamble. "My government, they think you're bluffing. They're planning to send a warship to test your quarantine." Xylo's gray form rippled with anxiety. "That would be unwise. Our quarantine is not a threat. It is a shield. If your military vessels approach, we will disable them. We will not destroy them, but we will not allow them to pass. The potential for a misunderstanding, for escalation, is immense." "I know," Elias said, "which is why I need your help. I am submitting a final report to my government, an appeal for reason, but my words are not enough. They need to understand the fear. They need to feel what you feel." "We cannot project our feelings to you," Xylo stated. "That is the core of the quarantine." "I'm not asking you to," Elias said, taking a step closer. "I'm asking you to give me a testament. I want to interview Kalen." Xylo recoiled, its form flickering violently. "Impossible. Kalen cannot communicate. Its mind is a broken mirror." "Let me be the judge of that," Elias insisted. "Connect me to its chamber. Let me record what I see. Let me record the sounds, the energy readings, whatever I can. Let me show my people the cost of what happened. Let them see the victim of this, warden you speak of. It was a gamble, a desperate, dangerous idea, but he saw it as the only way. He had to transform the abstract threat into a tangible reality. He had to show them the wounded soldier from a war they didn't know was being fought. Xylo's mind communed with the consensus. Elias could feel the psychic pressure in the room shift, a silent, frantic debate. Finally, the gray form solidified. The consensus agrees. The risk of misunderstanding from your military is greater than the risk of this exposure. But you must come alone, and you must understand that what you witness may change you. It's a risk I'm willing to take, Elias said. He was escorted back to the medical bay, this time with a full sensor suite and a high-resolution recording drone floating over his shoulder. The chamber was the same, dimly lit and humming with a low energy. Kalen floated in the center, a dim, sad spark. As before, it was tracing the jagged symbol in the air with a tendril of light, over and over, a broken record of a thought. Kalen, Elias said softly, "My name is Elias Vance. I was there at the contact. I am so deeply sorry for what happened to you." There was no response. The tracing continued. The symbol would flash, hold for a second, and then dissolve. Flash, hold, dissolve. Elias instructed the drone to focus on the symbol, to analyze its energy signature, its form, its frequency. He then turned his attention to the ambient sound. He had the audio sensors boosted to their maximum sensitivity. Beneath the low hum of the chamber, there was another sound. It was incredibly faint, a high-frequency whisper that was more of a feeling in his bones than a sound in his ears. He listened intently. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't music. It was a pattern. A complex, repeating sequence of tones, almost like a mathematical equation being sung. It was coming from Kalen. "Xylo," he sub-vocalized into his comm. "What is that sound?" "It is the resonance," Xylo's voice replied in his ear. "The echo of the boundary. It is all Kalen does now. It traces the warning and hums the frequency of the wall." Elias felt a sudden intuitive leap, a crazy, desperate idea. "Ben," he called, patching his comm through to the linguist. "I'm sending you a live audio feed. It's a patterned sound. Treat it like a language. See if you can find a structure, a meaning." For an hour, Elias stood in that chamber, a silent vigil. He watched the endless, pathetic tracing of the warning sign. He listened to the faint, haunting hum. He felt the profound, tragic stillness of the room seep into his own soul. This, he realized, was the face of true terror. Not a loud, screaming thing, but a quiet, endless, broken repetition of a single, terrible truth. Then Ben's voice crackled in his ear, breathless and shaky. "Elias, my God, it's not a language, it's a coordinate system." "What?" "The pattern, the frequencies, it's not a message, it's a map, or a LOX combination. It's describing a location. A single, precise point. The coordinates aren't astronomical. They're biological, psychological. It's pinpointing a specific structure within the human genome. A section of what we've always called junk DNA." Elias stared at the broken form of Kalen. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of terrifying scope. The junk DNA, the 9/10ths of the human genome that scientists had never understood. What if it wasn't junk at all? "And the symbol," Ben went on, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "The one Kalen keeps tracing. I cross-referenced its geometry with the coordinate structure from the sound. Elias, it's a key. The symbol is a visual representation of the molecular structure needed to activate that specific sequence of DNA. The sound is the location, the symbol is the key to the lock." A profound silence filled the line. Elias looked at Kalen, and for the first time he understood. The contact hadn't just shown the glyphs the lock on the door of the human mind. It had shown them the key. Kalen's shattered mind was endlessly, obsessively replaying the two things it had learned in that terrifying nanosecond of contact: the location of the lock and the shape of the key that could open it. The warden wasn't just a guard. It had left behind the very tools needed for its own undoing or its awakening. And the glyphs in their terror had slammed the door, desperate to forget they had ever seen them. "Thank you, Xylo," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "I have everything I need." He backed out of the chamber, the drone floating silently behind him. He had his report now. He had the proof. He would show his government the broken form of Kalen. He would show them the symbol, the key. And he would give them the coordinates, the location of the lock buried deep within every man, woman, and child on Earth. He would deliver a message of his own. It would not be a plea for peace with the glyphs. It would be a warning to his own species. There is a door inside us that we never knew existed, and now we have the key. The question is no longer whether we are alone in the universe. The question is, and has always been, are we brave enough or foolish enough to turn the lock and see what we have kept caged inside ourselves for 1,000,000 years? He walked back to the human sector, the weight of that question settling upon him like a shroud. The silence of the station seemed to stretch on forever, a vast and terrifying quiet filled with the hum of a sleeping giant. He looked out the viewport at the distant blue Earth. It had never looked so fragile or so dangerous. His hand went to his temple and he imagined he could feel it, a faint, phantom click. The key sliding into the lock. The great silent conversation was not over. It was only just beginning.